Good day again mga kapilo. This day, we will have another philosophical coffee session and we will just continue our discussion last time because this is already the second part of the frameworks and principles behind moral dispositions. Kung last time we discussed about Aristotle and St. Thomas Aquinas, this time we will discuss about Immanuel Kant and utilitarianism of Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill. So we will be discussing three philosophers for this day. So let me just share my screen in order for us to start our discussion. So let us first study Immanuel Kant. So who is Immanuel Kant? Immanuel Kant lived all his 80 years in the small provincial town of Königsberg in East Prussia. He became he studied classics, physics, and philosophy. Kant became a lecturer, and in 1770 he was appointed to the chair of philosophy of the University of Königsberg. Now, although Kant's personal life contains no remarkable events, as he did not travel and he developed no notable political or social connections, he was immensely successful as a lecturer and was an interesting conversationalist and charming host. Actually, mayroong chismis dito kay Immanuel Kant. Hindi siya lumabas sa kanyang bayan. Nandun lang siya in his whole life. Now, he is often pictured as an old bachelor whose every activity was scheduled. Kaya nga minsan ginagawa siyang orasan ng mga kapitbahay nila. So was scheduled with such precision that neighbors could set their watch when he stepped out of his house each day at 4:30 to walk up and down his small avenue 8 times. So nonetheless, Kant's greatest contribution is that he revolutionized modern philosophy. He was able to combine two conflicting thoughts during his time. Ito yung idealism and empiricism. Idealism believes that knowledge comes from the ideas or from the mind, and empiricist believes that knowledge comes from the senses. Kant was able to synthesize idealism and empiricism. Now, Kant's chief point is that the essence of the morally good act is the principle that a person affirms when he wills an act. The good will is the will to do the right thing, whatever that good thing is. Again, the good will is the will to do the right thing, whatever that is or whatever that good is. So accordingly, the goodwill is good not because of what it causes or accomplishes, but or not because of its usefulness in the attainment of some set purpose, but because it is good in itself. Okay? Again, to simplify, hindi ito mabuti, the goodwill is not good because it has some cause or it can accomplish something, or not because it is useful or it can cause a good thing or it is intended for a good purpose. It is good because it is good in itself. And later on, I will give you some examples in order for you to better understand what this goodwill is. Now, for example, helping the poor or giving aid to the needy is good, not because the poor being helped or the needy giving aid is benefited, but because the act of helping or giving aid is good in itself. So ganito yan, tumutulong ka sa mahihirap, maganda yung pagtulong sa mahihirap, not because napapasaya mo sila or not because nagiging maginhawa yung buhay nila, but because yung pagtulong sa mahihirap is good in itself. That is according to Kant. Now, the act of helping or giving aid, it will always be good in itself. Hindi magiging masama ang pagtulong sa mahihirap or ang pagtulong sa iba. Though it can cause negative effects. Siyempre, nakakasama yan. Because the ones who were helped and given aid can be dependent or would abuse the ones helping them or helping them. Just like for example, yung issue ngayon dun sa mga pantries natin, na kung saan sabi may mga attackers dun sa mga pantries, sa community pantries na naglipa na sa buong Pilipinas, wherein they say that tinuturuan lang daw yung mga mahihirap o yung mga nangangailangan na maging dependent dun sa mga nagbibigay ng pantry. So, ako, for Kant, I don't care about that. Sasabihin niya, basta ang importante, yung, yung pagtulong ko sa mahihirap, good siya, good in itself. Whatever the consequences may be, whatever the effects it will cause, I don't care. Basta ang pagtulong sa mahirap is good in itself, then that's it. That is according to Kant. Sabi nga dito, what is important is that the very act of helping or giving aid is good in itself. Now, duty implies that we are under some kind of obligation or what we call a moral law. Kant says that as rational beings, we are aware of this obligation as it comes to us in the form of an imperative. Not all imperatives or commands are connected with morality, for they are not in every case directed to all people, and they lack the quality of universality that a moral rule requires. There are technical imperatives or rules of the skill, which command us to do certain things if we want to achieve certain ends. For example, gusto natin gumawa ng bahay, dapat meron tayong sufficient quality materials of certain strength. Tama. But we do not absolutely have to build our own house. Kailangan bang i-build mo yung sarili mong bahay? Or kailangan ba ikaw mismo yung magtayo ng sarili mong bahay? If you have enough money, you may buy a ready-made house. Or better, you could ask somebody or a contractor to build the house for you. Yung mga tight ang budget, sila yung gumagawa ng sarili nilang bahay. Yung iba, DIY or tumatawag sila ng mga kamag-anak or sila bayanihan in order for them to build their own house nang nakakatipid sila or nang tight yung kanilang budget. Makukuha pa rin nila yung dream house nila. But according to Kant, kailangan bang magkaroon ka ng bahay? O kailangan bang i-build mo yung sarili mong bahay? So, now we go to Prudential Imperatives, which says that if I want to be popular with certain people, I must say or do certain things. I may donate money to the poor, or I may conduct feeding programs, or I may spearhead medical missions in order for the people to know me and be popular among them. So pwede kong gawin yun, or I can do the TikTok, magsasayaw ako dito, or kung ano-ano pang gagawin ko in order for me to become popular. But is being popular an imperative? It is not absolutely necessary that I achieve this kind of popularity. Hindi ko naman kailangan maging sikat. Hindi ko naman kailangan maging popular. Okay? I can influence others without being popular. The technical and prudential imperatives are hypothetical imperatives because they command us only if we decide to enter their sphere of operation. They are not absolutely necessary. Hindi sila ganun ka-importante. Because they are just hypothetical imperatives. Unlike the technical and prudential imperatives, which are hypothetical in nature, the truly moral imperative is categorical and not just hypothetical. So this categorical imperative applies to all people and commands an action necessary of itself without the reference to another end that is objectively necessary. Kailangang gawin, kailangang matupad. Hindi yung katulad ng kailangan ko bang i-build yung sarili kong bahay, kailangan ko bang maging popular, hindi sila categorical imperative. So ang categorical imperative, ito yung dapat mong ginagawa. Ito yung dapat na mangyari. Now, it commands certain conducts immediately without having any other purpose as a condition. The categorical imperative commands as a law that forms the basis of particular actions. It is categorical because it instantly applies to all rational beings. Again, it is categorical because it instantly applies to all rational beings. Does it apply to animals? Does it apply to plants? The answer is no, because those plants and animals are not rational beings. It only applies to human beings because human beings are rational beings. And it is imperative because it is the principle on which we should act or we ought to act. Now, the basic formulation of the categorical imperative is this: act only on that maxim whereby you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. Now, Kant believes that everything in nature works according to laws. Rational beings alone have the faculty of acting according to the conception of laws. For example, a person holds that it is wrong to kill another. Masama daw ang pumatay ng ibang tao. Killing is immoral per se. It is bad, or it is immoral to kill another person. Not because it is prohibited under the law, but because it runs contrary to the natural right to life and the right to preserve and enjoy life, which is embedded in the very nature of man. Masamang pumatay kasi if you have the right to life and you have the right to enjoy life, you should also give the right to life to other people and the right for them to enjoy their life. If you will be killing them, then you will not be giving them their right to life or their exercise to right to life, and you will not be giving them the opportunity to do whatever they want to do in as much as they are not affecting other people. Same is true with the right to property. You cannot take what is not yours. Hindi mo pwedeng kukunin ang hindi sa'yo. Ang kay Juan ay kay Juan. Ang kay Pedro ay kay Pedro. So, ang kay Juan hindi pwedeng kukunin ni Pedro at ang kay Pedro ay hindi rin naman pwedeng kukunin ni Jose. For example, layman's term na lang natin, i-actualize at sa mga present situations natin. We use present situations. Yung mga ayuda, for example, na binibigay ng government. Kapag ibinibigay ka sa certain people na nakalista doon sa SAP, sa Special Amelioration Program, dapat hindi napapakialaman ng kung sinong Poncio Pilato. Kung 4,000 ang nakalagay, dapat 4,000 ang ibigay. Hindi sardinas ang ibibigay o 1 kilong bigas. So dahil na ipadaan na kung kani-kanino, nababawasan and it runs contrary with the right to property kasi ibibigay na yon. Kung entitled sila doon, they have the right para ma-enjoy yun pag naibigay na sa kanila. Kung hindi na ibigay sa kanila yung talagang entitlement nila, then hindi nila na-enjoy yung right nila over the property na dapat nilang ine-enjoy. And money is a personal property, for instance. Now, the categorical imperative does not give us specific rules of conduct, for it appears to be simply an abstract formula. Still, this was precisely what Kant thought moral philosophy should provide us in order to guide our moral behavior. For him, once we understand the fundamental principle of the moral law, we can apply it to specific cases. Kant contends that what makes us human is our rationality. Again and again and again. Si Aristotle, si St. Thomas Aquinas, sabi nila, what makes us human persons is our rationality. And Kant also adheres to that notion that what makes us human beings is our capacity to rationalize or to reason out. Okay? Our capacity to rationalize, or our being as a rational being is therefore an end in itself. Humans are not things but persons. Hindi tayo bagay. Okay, tayo ay mga tao. Hindi tayo hayop, hindi tayo bagay, tayo ay mga tao. Humans become things when they are used as means for other ends. Bilang tao, dapat itatrato kang tao. Dapat hindi ka tinatrato na bagay o isang o hayop. You should not be treated as a means for other ends, but you must be treated as an end. Okay? So the individual human being as possessing absolute worth becomes the basis for the supreme principle of morality. And the foundation of this principle is that rational nature exists as an end in itself. All men everywhere want to be considered persons instead of things. And this affirmation of absolute worth of the individual leads to a second formulation of the categorical imperative. So act as to treat humanity, whether in your own person or in that any other, in every case as an end, never as means only. Dapat itatrato natin yung ibang tao as an end in themselves and not just means. This is crucial to interpersonal relationships among men, wherein in reality, there are people who tend to relate to others only in as much as others have a purpose or value to them. Hence, the others are not considered as persons but only as things. So ginagamit lang pala kayo. Ganun ang contention ni Immanuel Kant. So kapag ginagamit ka lang not as an end in itself, dapat hindi mo siya ini-entertain. For example, classmate mo, kinokopyahan ka lang, pag kailangan mangopya, doon ka lang naaalala. So, for example, another thing, ito, usong-uso ito, kaya lang hindi nyo na na-experience kasi naabutan kayo ng lockdown. Kapag magpapaquiz yung professor, kapag magpapaquiz yung instructor, oh, class, bring out 1/2 sheet of yellow paper. Oh, pahingi ng papel, pahingi ng papel, pahingi ng papel. Hingi ng papel doon sa tao na yon. Tapos kapag siya na yung may kailangan, wala nang may kakilala sa kanya kasi trinato lang siya as something na napapakinabangan nila. Pag hindi mo na napapakinabangan, hindi mo na siya kilala. So ganun yun. And so is applicable to other situations na kung saan ginagamit lang yung tao as in as much as may purpose pa siya. Kapag wala ka ng purpose, wala. Hindi ka na kailangan. Okay, there is a third formulation of the categorical imperative which is already implied in the first two, but which Kant wants to make explicit. It is that we should always so act that the will could regard itself at the same time as making universal law through its own maxim. Now here, Kant speaks of the autonomy of the will, that each person through his own act legislates the moral law. Ikaw mismo alam mo, dapat i-legislate mo sa sarili mo kung ano yung mga tama at yung mga maling actions. He distinguishes autonomy from heteronomy, the determination of a law or action by someone or something other than the self. Dapat hindi mo pinahahayaan na yung ibang tao nagsasabi sa iyo na dapat mong ginagawa. Because you as a person with enough rationality, with enough reasoning ability, can determine what actions do you think are right. Okay? A heteronomous will is influenced or even determined by desires or inclination. Now, the categorical imperative, therefore, speaks of the universality of the moral law. Number 2, affirms the supreme worth of each rational person. And number 3, assigns freedom or autonomy to the will. Now, there are two types of rights according to Immanuel Kant. Meron ito yung tinatawag na legal rights and moral rights. Let us first discuss what legal rights are. Legal rights are rights which exist under the rules of legal systems or by virtue of decisions of suitably authoritative bodies within them. In other words, they are rights which are created through our laws. For example, the rights which are enshrined under the Philippine Constitution, such as the right to suffrage or yung karapatan nating bumoto, the right to travel, the right to liberty of abode, the right to be presumed innocent, the right to speedy disposition of cases, to name a few, are all legal rights. They are there, or you enjoy these rights because there are laws that grant them to you. Without the Constitution, you will not enjoy the right to travel, the right to liberty of abode, the right to be presumed innocent, or any other rights. Okay, those are legal rights. We go now to moral rights. Moral rights accorded under some system of ethics, are rights accorded to under some system of ethics. these rights might be grounded in mere humanity. They might be rights that all people deserve just because they are humans or because they are rational beings or whatsoever. For example, it is morally accepted that each person has the right to be treated fairly or the right to fairness. Dapat maging fair ang treatment sa bawat isa sa atin. The right to justice or the right not to be used as objects but be treated as persons or ends in themselves. So yan ang pagkakaiba ng legal rights sa moral rights. Now we go to utilitarianism. What is utilitarianism? Utilitarianism is a theory in the field of ethics which contends that moral actions are those which produce the greatest good for the greatest number of people. This theory is the most memorable contribution of the great British philosophers Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill. Ito, tandaan nyo ito. Moral actions are those which produce the greatest good for the greatest number of people. In as much as it is good for the greatest number of people, then it is good. Hanggat nakakapagbigay siya ng happiness to the greatest number of people, then it is good. It is the right thing to do. Kahit may naapektuhan na iba, okay lang, basta nakakapagpasaya ng mas nakararami. So the rule of the majority, applicable yan sa utilitarianism from the word utility, hanggat nagagamit pa siya ng karamihan, hanggat nakakapagpasaya pa siya ng karamihan, then it is good. If it does not give, if it no longer give happiness to the greatest number of people, then it is now bad. It is no longer good. Now, the principle of utility under Jeremy Bentham. So ito aaralin natin una bago yung kay John Stuart Mill. To be subject to pleasure and pain is a fact we all recognize. And it is also a fact that we desire pleasure and avoid pain. Sino ba naman ang gusto ng nahihirapan? Siyempre, ang gusto natin, tayo ay nagiginhawaan. Tayo ay nag-e-enjoy. Sino bang naman ang ayaw mag-enjoy, di ba? Now, Bentham offers the principle of utility, which is that principle which approves or disapproves of every action whatsoever according to the tendency which appears to have to augment or diminish happiness. Now, Bentham distinguishes four sources of our behavior. Ano nakaka-affect ng ating behavior? They are called sanctions. A sanction is what gives binding force to a rule of conduct or to a law. And he terms these four sanctions as the following: the physical sanction, the political sanction, the moral sanction, and the religious sanction. So let us study them one by one. So ano nga ba itong mga sanctions na ito? I will give you some examples. Our own imprudence, for example, ako na lang, my own imprudence which causes accident or calamity may be styled to a punishment. A sanction is a punishment. Okay, it can be a punishment of various kinds of sanctions. For example, nagmaneho ako ng sasakyan. Because of my kapabayaan, because of my imprudence, because of my recklessness, okay, I bumped a house. Nabangga ko yung bahay. Kasalanan ko naman eh. Because of the accident, I hurt my arm. Nasaktan ko yung kamay ko. Okay? Nasaktan ko din yung paa ko. I have to undergo now a series of surgical operations and I will never be the same healthy person I used to be. Hindi na ako healthy, hindi na makapaglakad na maayos, putol na yung kamay, pali na yung kamay ko, hindi na ako makakapag-drive ng maayos. Bakit? Because of my kapabayaan, because of my recklessness sa pagmamaneho. Now, my own imprudence has caused me a physical sanction. Physical sanction yun kasi I am never the same again. I will never be the same again na healthy person na nakakalakad na maayos, na nakakapag-basketball ng maayos, na nakakapag-gitara ng maayos kasi bali na nga yung kamay ko, tukol na yung paa ko. Diba? tukol si Ilocano. Now, because I bump a house, not only do I cause damage to myself, but also to others. 'Di ba? Eh, yung may-ari ng bahay, paano naman? 'Di ba? Eh, kung hindi sa akin yung sasakyan, paano naman yung may-ari ng sasakyan? Okay. Hence, I will also be charged of reckless imprudence resulting to damage to private property because I bumped a house. Since there is a law that punishes the result of my imprudence, I have to face the charges against me as well as the liabilities and the legal obligations it implies. Nagkaroon na nga ako ng physical sanction, magbabayad pa ako ngayon dun sa nabangga kong bahay. Bakit? Na-damage yung property niya. So he has the right to property. Nararapat lamang na bayaran ko yung nasira ko. So this punishment belongs to the political sanctions because a certain law punishes reckless imprudence. Now, if a lot of people will dislike me, sino ba naman magugustuhan ng isang palpak, nakabangga ng bahay, may mga kamag-anak yan, asira ko yung bahay nila, siyempre magagalit sa akin yung mga kamag-anak doon, magagalit din sila mismo sa akin. So people will dislike me because of my imprudence. And this was resulted by the accident I was into. The punishment is called a moral sanction. Hindi kasi ako nag-iingat eh. So nakabangga ako. So there's a moral sanction. And if by an immediate act of God's displeasure manifested on account of the sin I committed, the punishment is called a religious sanction. So yan ang apat na sanctions according to Jeremy Bentham. Yung tinatawag na physical sanction, political sanction, religious sanction, and moral sanction. Now, Kant argued that the morality of an act depends upon having the right motive and not upon the consequences of the act. Sabi naman ni Bentham, kabaliktaran. Bentham takes the opposite position, saying that the morality of an act depends directly upon the consequences of an act. Kung ano yung nagiging consequences ng action, doon depende whether the action is good or bad, or whether an action is right or wrong. He admits that some motives are more likely than others to increase happiness. But it is still pleasure and not the motive that confers the quality of morality upon acts. So, dapat daw yung pleasure, yung nagbibigay ng enjoyment, yung nagbibigay ng contentment dun sa mga tao kapag nakapag-produce siya ng pleasure, doon yun ang measure kung whether an action is good or bad. Now, Bentham claims that each individual is concerned with avoiding pain and achieving pleasure. Diba, ayaw naman natin yung nasasaktan tayo. Siyempre, gusto natin yung nagiginhawaan. So, ang hinahabol natin, yung mga bagay na makapagbibigay sa atin ng kaginhawaan o ng enjoyment kaysa yung mga bagay na kung saan makaka-feel tayo ng pain. Okay? But pleasures and pains differ from each other and therefore have different values. With an attempt at mathematical precision, Bentham speaks of units or what he called lots daw of pleasure or pain. He suggests that before we act, we should calculate the value of these lots. Now, their value taken by themselves will be greater or less depending upon pleasure's intensity, duration, certainty, and propinquity or nearness. When we consider not only the pleasure by itself, but what consequences it can lead to, we must calculate other circumstances. These include a pleasure's fecundity or its chances of being followed by more pleasure. O, 'di ba? Yung hindi lang isang pleasure lang, but yung mga susunod pa na pleasure makakapagbigay pa sa atin mas madami pang pleasure. And its purity or the chances that pleasure will be followed by some pain. Hindi naman pwede na pleasure then pain, pleasure, pain. Ang gusto natin pleasure, 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 pleasure as much as possible. Now, another circumstance is a pleasure's extent. That is the number of persons to whom it extends or who are affected by the action. Yung community pantry, it's good. Why? It can give pleasure to a number of people. Noong una, nag-umpisa lang sa maginhawa. So may mga sumunod na, nagkaroon ng mga matatag pantry, nagkaroon na sa Ilagan, nagkaroon na sa Kawayan, nagkaroon na hanggang Bayumbong, hanggang sa ibang mga lugar nagkaroon ng community pantry, and it shows the bayanihan spirit of the Filipino. It gives me goosebump actually nung binabasa ko, nung nakikita ko sa Facebook yung pagdami ng mga community pantries na ang intention ay tumulong sa mga nangangailangan. Sabi nga doon, from each according to his abilities, to each according to his needs. Magbigay ng naayon sa kakayahan, kumuha lamang ng naaayon sa kinakailangan. Now, according to Bentham, we sum up all the values of all the pleasures on the one side and those of the pains on the other side. Kung sinong mas mabigat, okay. Kung sino mas mabigat, wag mong dun depending action mo. Mas mabigat ng pleasure, okay, good. Mas mabigat ng pain, then not good. Wag mong gagawin yung isang action. So dapat i-weigh mo muna. If it gives you pleasures on the one side, but it can also affect you displeasure or pain on the other side, titimbangin mo kung ano yung mas mabigat, yung pleasure ba o yung pain ba. So, ganun pag magde-decide ka ng action according to Bentham. The balance, if it be on the side of the pleasure, will give the good tendency of the act. Otherwise, it is of the bad tendency. This shows that Bentham is interested chiefly in the quantitative aspects of pleasure. Quantitative sa dami, sa bilang. So, nabibilang mo siya, mas madaming pleasure, the better. All actions are equally good if they produce the same amount of pleasure. Now, we study about John Stuart Mill's version of utilitarianism. Though kasi parehas silang utilitarianism or they adhere to utilitarianism, may bahagyang pagkakaiba sila. So let me just excuse myself. Okay, John Stuart Mill defined the principle of utility perfectly consistent with what Bentham taught. He says that the greatest happiness principle holds that actions are right in proportion as they tend to promote happiness. Wrong as they tend to produce the reverse of happiness, o tinatawag natin displeasure or pain. So if it gives happiness, then it's good. If it does not give happiness, then it's bad. Now, by happiness is intended pleasure and the absence of pain. By unhappiness, pain and the privation of pleasure. But even though he started with the same general ideas as Bentham did, especially relating happiness with pleasure, Mill soon took a different approach. So may kaunting difference ngayon sa utilitarianism na ina-adhere ni John Stuart Mill dun sa kanyang predecessor na si Jeremy Bentham. Now, Mill substituted Bentham's quantitative approach into qualitative approach. Hindi daw nakadepende sa dami ng pleasure but on the quality of the pleasure. So he believes that pleasures differ from each other in kind and quality, not only in quantity. So yung kalidad ng pleasure, yung kalidad ng enjoyment o yung kalidad ng kaginhawaan na kokos o maigiging consequence ng certain action. Now, he took his stand with the ancient Epicureans who emphasized that pleasure is the end of all behavior. Now, he argues that human beings have faculties more elevated than the animal appetites. And when one's conscious of them, do not regard anything as happiness, which does not include their gratification. Further, he contends that pleasures of the intellect and imagination have a higher value than the pleasures of mere sensation. Again, I will repeat. Further, he contends that pleasures of the intellect and imagination have a higher value than the pleasures of mere sensation. For him, the mere quantity of pleasure produced by an act was of secondary importance when we have to make a choice between pleasures. So hindi nakadepende sa dami kundi sa quality ng pleasure na ibibigay. Now, Mill's version of utilitarianism differs from Bentham's view in three ways. First, he prefers the higher quality of happiness over a mere quantity in pleasure. So he argues that there is no way to measure either the quantity or quality of pleasures. Whenever we have to make a choice between two pleasures, we can express a preference wisely only if we have experienced both possibilities. Second, Mill's theory involves that when we should actually consult the utilitarian guideline, according to him, we rarely need to consider the consequences of our specific actions. Instead, we should go about our lives following general moral rules, such as rules against killing, stealing, and lying. These rules can be trusted since they are already tested whether we facilitate general happiness when we follow them. For example, I have no money to provide for the needs of my family. I consider to rob a bank. Magnanakaw ako to get as much money as possible. Siyempre, sino ba naman ay magkapera? And madaling magkapera kapag magnanakaw ka. Okay? Here, I am torn between two moral rules. Two moral rules. To provide for my family and not to steal. Paano ako makakapag-provide sa pamilya ko? Paano din ako hindi magnanakaw? Now, so paano makakapag-provide sa pamilya ko kung hindi ako magnanakaw? Kung magnanakaw naman ako, what if mahuli ako? So, paano ako makakapag-provide sa pamilya ko? In this situation, we resolve the conflict by determining which course of action would bring about the most happiness. Napapakain ko nga yung pamilya ko, nagnanakaw naman ako. Magiging masaya ba ako? Masisigmura ko bang kainin yung mga kinakain ko na kung saan at nakikita ko masaya yung pamilya ko samantalang yung ninanakawan ko nagsasuffer because of my actions. So 'di ba? May mga nakaka-relate ba sa ganyan? 'Di ba? So, 'di ba? Marami siguro, marami. Nandiyan lang sila sa paligid-ligid, 'di ba? Okay, yung masaya yung pamilya nila pero maraming tao naghihirap. So, basta kilala niyo na sila. Now, third is that Bentham's and Mill's theory involves their respective ways of dealing with human selfishness. Bentham simply assumed that we ought to choose those acts that produce for us the greatest quantity of pleasure and that we should naturally help other people achieve happiness. So hindi lang tayo, dapat tumulong din tayo sa ibang tao in order for them also to become happy. Mill accepted this point but added that we may rely on a variety of social institutions to help broaden our level of concern for others. He stresses that laws and social arrangements should place the happiness or the interest of every individual as nearly as possible in harmony with the interest of the whole. Okay, so this I hope class that you were able to acquire the 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 notion of the three philosophers that I discussed. Itong sila Immanuel Kant, si Jeremy Bentham, and si John Stuart Mill. And if there are some questions, just feel free to ask me. You can directly message me through the messenger or huwag kayong mahiya magtatanong kasi napaka-importante ng clarification. Kasi mahirap naman yung ako nag-discuss dito, hindi nyo naman pala siya naiintindihan. So I will be very happy if you will be asking me some questions about the discussions that we are doing right now. Kasi alam naman natin that during this pandemic, napakahirap talaga nung learning process. Yung teaching process mahirap na din kasi ang hirap nito, nag-lecture ako, wala akong kaharap. I can't see you. I can see whether I can see your body language, whether you are learning something from the lectures that I do. Hindi ko alam. So, class, one thing na pinapakiusap ko sa inyo, if you have some clarifications, if you have some questions that you want to throw, ibato nyo sa akin, sabihin nyo sa akin, you inform me. And by the way, this lecture video is not only intended for my class, it ISU Kawayan campus, but also to other sections and to all students who are actually taking up ethics this semester. And special mention to my good friend, Sir Janto Bautista of ISU Kabagan. Your students are very free to use my use this lecture video as a uh, in order for them uh, to add something from the things that you are doing right now, yung mga nile-lecture mo. And for other students from other schools from around the Philippines, actually may mga nagme-message sa akin, this is for you, and hindi ko ipagdadamot yung mga lecture videos, and I would be very very happy na makatulong sa iba. Okay? Especially in this time of pandemic. So again, class, sa mga susunod na discussions natin, I am your philosophy instructor, Sir Christian Gonzalez, saying you a goodbye and God bless. So mag-iingat tayo lahat. Bye-bye, class.